11 digger. This is a wicked time from the planet E. Shocking when I would like to take you on a trip. Come on along now and listen to our tunes. Just sit back as we go zoom, zoom, zoom. Who is she and what's the trouble? Who is the girl that...
Hey guys, welcome to Frank's Tech Help. So today we're going to be taking a look at a MacBook 15-inch. My client brought this system in, and she'd recently upgraded the RAM in it, and then after that it started shutting down on her, and I asked her to reseat the RAM, which she did, and then also check the fans since she had the bottom of the case open, and she kind of blew it out with air and everything still looked good, but it still keeps shutting down. So the next thing kind of on the plate for me is that it's more than likely going to be the thermal paste needs to be replaced. Just comes to a certain point on Macs and a lot of other laptops where you just have to, you need to take it apart and redo the thermal paste to help it keep running cool. So after some testing, it does shut down after a few minutes or so. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today is the thermal paste. So I'm just going to jump in here and let me set the camera proper angle here, just for the sake of this video. Go ahead and remove the screws. So we'll pop the bottom off here and kind of look, and as you can see from the top, the fans do look relatively clean. She took some canned air and kind of blew them out, and sometimes it can cause more of a problem because the canned air can actually lodge. You know, if you blow it in from the back side here, you can actually push the dirt and dust stuff back up into it, but everything does look clean. There are no actual like serious chunks of dirt or anything floating around in there. And as we can see right here, the RAM is seated properly. Usually you'll be able to see some of the gold line right here if it's not seated properly in this case. So just go ahead and start by double checking that. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the RAM here, get started with that, set this aside. And so first thing I want to do is disconnect the battery here. Simply lift up on the connector there to disconnect that, and from there we'll need to disconnect the battery, and there are also some additional screws here for connectors that we'll need to disconnect. I'll go over those here as we go. So I'm going to use my TriStar here to go ahead and pull the screws for the battery. So once you have those screws removed, the battery just kind of slides right out of place. And from there, we're going to have these two. There are a few different connectors here that you're going to want to disconnect, but these two screws will be the next that come out. And this is a standard Phillips head right here. So underneath this, we'll see a couple of various connectors here. And on this one, you just flick up the little bracket here and then slide the ribbon cable out of that slot right there. This one right here just flicks up and off like so. So we have one over here for the hard drive that we need to come out of place. And then an audio connector on this side. Just lifts up out of place. Most of these connectors lift up and out on the Mac. And a couple of them do occasionally slide out, such as the case with this one right here. You're going to just give it a little tug right there and slide it out. And LCD or LVCD, whatever cable back here. Wheel that one back and forth so that it comes out of place. And then there's going to be two fan connectors here. You need to gently lift up those, get those out of the way on both sides here. And the key here is gentle, gentle, gentle. Be gentle with everything. You run the risk of breaking. Some of these cables can break fairly easily. And so I'm just kind of looking around to make sure there aren't any other cables connected here. Alright, so the next step in this process is going to be to remove the fans. We do have a small star connector for this one right here. Looks like a T4 Torx for this. So there'll be 3 screws on each fan that you'll need to remove. And I typically, when I take screws and stuff out, I put the screws with the individual parts as they come out. Makes it easier to remember where everything goes when you put it back together there. Alright, so once you take the screws out for the fans, go ahead and lift this out, and then we're also going to verify by looking inside, underneath on the inside of the fan there as you spin it around, just to make sure there aren't any little dust bunnies hiding around, and you can blow that out. Everything looks clean for that. Make a little space over here. Now I do see some dust right in here, gathered up on the back of the vent, so even though it was cleaned out with some canned air, this is kind of what you end up with as far as that goes, and that's part of the problem in this scenario as far as the heating factor goes. There wasn't enough to really completely block the fans up on that, so I'm going to have to adjust the focus point on my camera here real quick. Alright, so I did fix the manual focus on the camera there, sorry about that. Alright, so the next step in this process is you're going to want to find all of the primary logic board screws kind of in the back, various spots right there, and so if you kind of look around, you'll see them kind of planted throughout, and typically they have a silver ring seated around them, and so they're relatively easy to spot. So we're going to go ahead and remove the screws for the logic board here. And I also like to place these out. Most of these screws are the same size, but I do kind of place them together during this process. This back here, there's a small, tiny cable right here next to the fan system that you'll need to deal with. So just tilt up there, and then slide this cable. This is kind of the critical one. A lot of people miss this during the reassembly, and so just make a note where all of your cables are hooked up and whatnot as far as this process goes. So at this point, the board starts officially releasing out of the connectors here. And one other thing you'll need to do is to remove the power supply because it is plugged in underneath. So you'll want to take the 2 screws out of the power jack, and they are a different size than the other screws, so just keep that in mind. Alright, so once those screws are loose, you're going to lift up just at an angle because these ports are locked into the side there. So you're going to lift up at an angle to start to remove those, and as you can see, the entire logic board comes out in one piece now. So I'm just going to kind of inspect for dust, make sure everything looks relatively clean, and there's a little bit of dust on the processor here. So it looks like she did a good job cleaning it out as far as the canned air. There wasn't a ton of dust residual in there. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and set the logic board aside, or the case housing aside right here, and dig out my thermal paste. So for this next step, basically just use a Phillips head screwdriver, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws holding this down into place. Actually, I'm going to need a slightly larger Phillips head there. Alright, so now we've got the screws out. Just simply lift up on the heatsink there and examine the thermal paste, and yeah, as you can see right there, it's all dry, crusty and everything. So yeah, it's just flaking away, so that stuff is spent. So easiest way, just go ahead and kind of scrape it out, and then clean it up out of this space when you're done. going to use a spudger to clean it, get all this excess off. Yeah, it all just completely crumbles out of the way there. So, so from there, you can just use a paper towel. You can use a little touch of alcohol on this, although I don't know if I would do that necessarily on the processor. So you just want to clean all the thermal paste off, the residue, make it kind of nice and clean there. Put that to the side, and then come in carefully, gently, and clean off the processor as well. Don't press down too hard on this. You just kind of want to brush the surface of it enough to break up the previous thermal paste. Kind of get it gunked out there. Then tilt it over, give it a little tap, get all that excess out of the way. And another thing that I typically do is I'll use a toothbrush and then just kind of come in and brush around the edges to get any off the excess off of the contacts and stuff. Once again, not to brush too hard. You don't want to mess anything up here as far as the connectors, pins, anything. So, alright, that's out of the way, and I'm going to clean up this old excess thermal paste here. Gather it up, get it out of the way. So from there, we're going to put on some new thermal paste. There's no particular brand that I use. I know people have Arctic and their favorite and stuff that they use, but I'm not really here to advertise that. So, in fact, this one jar has lasted me a very, very long time. All right, so when you come back in to put new thermal paste on, you don't want to put a lot on, but you don't want to put too little on. So you're just going to kind of spread it out around the top and just give it a fairly decent amount there. And you don't have to cover the entire chip as long as you kind of get it in the center there, because when you press down, it's going to spread as far as that goes. And then you want to do the other one here as well. Just kind of straight down the middle. Get it spread around. So as I mentioned, you don't want to put too much, but you don't want to put too little. There we go. And I'll give you guys an idea of kind of the amount that I've used here. See if you can see kind of in the corner there. It's not placed too thickly on there, just enough so that when I put this heatsink back into place, it's going to spread out just a little bit. So just carefully align your heatsink back up, drop it into place, try not to touch it too much, spread that around just yet. And I'm going to typically put the center screw, this closest to the center, back into place first to kind of hold everything in as close of alignment as possible and put a little bit of pressure down on the processor. You don't want to tighten the screw down too tight just off the bat, because you need to align the rest of the board. So now once you get the second screw in, it's going to hold the rest of it fairly well in alignment, so you can go ahead and tighten those down. And these do have springs on them to help kind of keep it pressed down, so you don't have to tighten down too terribly tight on the screws, because the springs will help push it down into its proper position. If you tighten it too tight, it's going to push all of the thermal paste out from underneath, and that's not what you want to do. So alright, so that's pretty much it for the thermal paste. You can kind of look up under the sides here with your light if you want, once you're done, just to check to see how much oozing or whatnot you have. So hopefully this is going to take care of the situation, but come back in with the housing now, and carefully place this back in. Now when you go to put this board back in, you do want to go in the same process. You want to kind of go down and in as you put it back into place. Alright, so when you come back in, kind of keep your power jack, go ahead and kind of line it into where it's supposed to go, and you want to come in at your angle. And the most important part is to make sure your ports are all lined up on the side for your USB and various connectors on the side over there. And there's a connector, this is where a screw goes, and there's a cutout for this to go around, so it kind of gives you a guide when you're going to put that back in. So now the most important part is to make sure all of your cables are pulled out around the logic board here. Sorry, I had my thumb in the way. That these are all pulled out so that you don't get any of them trapped under the logic board itself. So we got a few on this side to pull out, and there, and then this one back here in the back being also another one of the most critical ones right there. We go. Alright, so at this point you want to double check all of your connectors, your power supply, everything is where it's supposed to be. The board seems to be seated properly. We have all of our ribbon cables out of the way where they're supposed to be, and you get that. Yep. Alright, so it looks good as far as all of our cables there. And so when you're putting this back together, the key element here is just don't tighten any of your screws down just quite yet. You want to make sure that they're going to align properly so that it holds the board down properly, but you don't want too much pressure in any one given spot yet. And so you're going to look on the side here. I don't know if you can see that, but you want to just make sure that your USB ports, everything lined up properly. And you can also verify this by the holes. You can see how the holes are lined up properly, so this is an indicator that everything is seated properly. Let's see, I'll go ahead and start up here with the screw. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to tighten this all the way down just yet. I'm going to put 2 or 3 in so that I can verify that the board is aligned properly, because if you don't do this the right way, then you're going to have issues after the fact. So alright, so I've got 2 screws in, everything seems aligned properly, so now you can go ahead and start tightening everything down as you're putting the screws back in. And also don't mistakenly actually put your logic board screws back in where one of the fan screws goes. So just to prevent that, I'm going to go ahead and place the fans in here, but before I do that, we need to connect this small little cable connector right here back up. Snug it into place and then flip the connector down on top. This fan can go back into place now that that other cable is hooked up. And so this will pretty much guarantee you, as far as the placement of your screws, now you should know at this point where everything goes because you can see it clearly. And the next step in this process you're going to want to perform is to lock the power supply back into place. The 2 longer screws here, just kind of line it up there, make sure that it pops down. And when you go to put these screws in, if you have to force them into place, then it's not aligned properly. Keep that in mind. So if you go to put the screw down in there and it twists freely, such as that, it's going into the right spot. Also, it can still be slightly out of alignment, so before you lock the first screw down, go ahead and put the second screw in, and that will help align everything. So now that that second screw's gone down, I go ahead and tighten it, and then come back and tighten this first one. Now pretty much guarantees your alignment is proper. So once it starts going in, so we go back and forth, and then a lot of these connectors that have the ribbon cables have a little line, dotted line, or a solid line across, just so you know that it's pushed in all the way. So press down on your ribbon connector there. Now come back in and hook up the LCD cable. A lot of times this doesn't want to line up properly the first time, so it may take once or twice to get it. There we go. You just push back and forth on either side as you go to help wiggle it back and forth. Once that's done, just click it down on the end here. It guarantees that it's hooked up properly once this clicks back down into place right there. So, alright, so you want to double check all of your connections Make sure everything's hooked up properly. There are no missing loose cables or slots that don't have something plugged into them. And from there, we're going to go ahead and put the fan screws back into place here. So you've got 3 on either of the fans. So just line, once again, you're going to want to do these, not tighten the first one down all the way because it can be misaligned. So just gently, don't screw it down all the way until you at least get a second one in. Once you get your second one in, the third one should go in without incident. Alright, so that's that. Everything is back into place. Oh, here, cable cover right here. Almost slipped by me there. And so we got 2 screws here for that. Go ahead and get your first one locked into place. Now there is also a little black bracket piece. I'm not sure if you can see that right there. Just make sure that the tab that goes down is not on the inside of this. It goes behind it, between that and the logic board. Because otherwise it'll be evident when you go to try to push it down. It'll be bulging, sticking out or whatever as far as that goes. So alright, so that takes care of that. And we'll go ahead and put screw bits back into the case here. So from there, we're going to put the battery back in, switch our TriStar tip back out, drop the battery back into place, put these screws in. So, all right, now last thing you're going to do is want to plug your battery in, but I'm going to go ahead and install the RAM first. So just give it a wiggle back there, seat it, make sure that you don't see any of the gold contacts sticking out right there. Okay, from there, plug the battery back in. Make sure everything's kind of dusted off, and so we want to verify that everything kicks on properly. Let me zoom back out on my camera here. Lift this open and make sure that it boots up properly. This is a first gen connector. So we can hook that up. And there we go. We see the power light come on. And yep, it turned orange, so that indicates the battery power here. And since I'm rebooting this, I've taken everything apart. I am going to set the PRAM. So I'm going to do Option Command P and R and hold that down. And I'm going to boot it once. You're going to hear you see that it boots up first, and then it's going to shut down, and it's going to reboot. Once it reboots the second time, you're going to let go. So you can let go of everything on that second boot. And we see we have our Apple logo and our loading indicator there. Pull this forward so you can see. Hope this video helped you guys out. And as always, thanks for watching Frank's Tech Help. Peace.
Shock when I would like to take you on a trip. Come on along now and listen to our tunes. Just sit back as we go zoom, zoom, zoom. Who she wants the trouble?